I've currently been playing through Yakuza 5, and in the dozens of hours I've sunk into this game about strong tattoo boys who could use a hug, there's a single cutscene that I can't stop thinking about. It's a last supper of sorts, being shared by two men who, while not related, consider themselves brothers. As they eat, there's a somber, almost tense atmosphere, as both of them know that upon the completion of this dinner, one of them will be incarcerated for the second time. It's a difficult meal for both of them, as they try to say their final goodbyes to the person they care about most. But despite the melancholic circumstances, they can't help but bring the conversation back to food. Even in the face of a lengthy prison sentence, it was the meal that they were sharing that remained of utmost importance to them. And I found this fascinating. As well as existing as a compelling piece of storytelling, no seriously, please play the Yakuza series, this scene also got me started in thinking about the importance of cooking and the intriguing relationship it shares with video games. There have been a variety of approaches already, as game developers have attempted to create the most immersive kitchen experience possible. But I think I'm still yet to play one that contains those moments of time-stopping bliss and ecstasy that is often portrayed in so much of other cooking media. See, cooking isn't my strong suit, but it is something I wish I was better at. And like most of my problems, instead of facing them and overcoming the hardship through work ethic, practice and research, I'd much prefer to cower and turn to video games where I can play pretend. So I've begun a search to try and find the best cooking game. One that accurately captures this skill of cooking, that emulates the highs and lows of preparing food for the people you love, and something that allows you to create dishes that's tastiness becomes paramount in the lives of anyone who eats them. So it's time for a bit of a departure from my regular style of video, as we take a closer look at the game design and mechanics of a few of the titles that already populate this fun, albeit niche, game genre, as we attempt to uncover just exactly what ingredients make for a satisfying cooking game. To develop a better understanding of what would make for a great cooking game, I turned to the best of culinary cinema and television for inspiration, and noticed there were a few key themes that were repeatedly featured. Themes that I think, if implemented into game design, could make for a functional, but more importantly, satisfying experience. The first being the most obvious, the idea of growth. As many of these stories attempt to capture the struggles of an aspiring chef, and to take the audience on a journey through their grueling rise to fame and glory. Often telling the dual narrative of both someone's cooking development and emotional development, like we see in the film Julie and Julia. A charming story of a woman who attempts to cook every meal from her idol's cookbook over the course of a year, while her life falls apart around her. It would seem pretty straightforward to implement this kind of uplifting story into a game, as the idea of a chef's progression makes for a passable game mechanic. So if we were to begin our search by looking at some of the cooking games that implement this, we'll quickly come across the ocean of cooking management games. Titles like Diner Dash, Food Truck Chef, and Cooking Fever all play near identically, tasking the player with juggling orders from customers to be completed as quickly as possible. Frenetic in pace, they attempt to emulate the atmosphere of a high-pressure kitchen during rush hour, as your multitasking skills are put to the test. But it's the next bit that I consider important, which unfortunately proves to be a design issue for these kinds of cooking games, as all of these games choose to have their progression represented monetarily. And here lies the problem. If we were to go back to Julie and Julia for a second, the battles that our protagonist Julia has to face all have to do with her lack of ability as a novice cook. With recipes increasing in difficulty over the course of the film, the reoccurring challenge of a new, more intimidating obstacle to be overcome makes Julia an endearing character. Someone whose rise feels genuine and earned as we watch her overcome these obstacles as she gains more experience and confidence in her abilities. Comparing that back to these games where the obstacles are pricey new kitchen appliances and recipes to purchase. Now there is growth here, but it's not even close to containing the same level of satisfaction gained from watching the film. It doesn't work here because the growth isn't within the chef. There's no rise in skill or knowledge as you play, and there's nothing at the end of these games that you couldn't complete at the start. Playing them, you don't feel that you're becoming an expert chef as much as you are a wealthy businessman, and it leaves the whole experience feeling rather unsatisfying. Luckily for us, there are a few cooking games that have tried to represent this idea of a more personal growth to the player, like in the Cooking Mama series. Here, the player will use the Nintendo DS stylus or Wii remote to emulate actions commonly performed when preparing food, in an attempt to have the player feel more like they're actually cooking. Step-by-step tasks such as peeling potatoes, chopping carrots, and stirring a boiling pot are also implemented, in an attempt to teach the player the basics of how to cook for people. Despite being terribly easy, it is more effective at immersing you into the kitchen, with recipes and techniques that can be transferred and implemented into real-world cooking. But as you can imagine, this motion control-based gameplay gets really old really fast, and severely lacks the depth required to create a satisfying feeling of growth as a chef, despite how praising Mama is when I do literally anything. And I can only be so disappointed as I know the series is designed for a younger audience, but despite the increased effort here to perform more hands-on chef-like activities, the series will inevitably leave you feeling like a child following along with Mama rather than a legitimate chef. Perhaps it would be more satisfying if you as the player were the one in charge, capable of creating any meal you wanted at the drop of a tall, poofy hat. A game that has explored this idea is Cooking Simulator, in which the player takes up the role of a failing restaurant's sole chef, and contains possibly the best representation of this growth of a chef that I've seen in a game. This game also tasks the player with orders from customers to complete as quickly as possible, but it does it in a way that is far more expansive than just quickly clicking on the ingredients on a static screen. Playing as the chef in first person, you're required to go and fetch your ingredients, and proceed to slice, flavor, and cook them to the exact degree that the order specifies. But what makes Cooking Simulator so satisfying is that it rewards precision. Unlike Cooking Mama, where a dish will ultimately be created the exact same way by everyone who plays it, Cooking Simulator is physics-based, meaning that like in real life, there will be a wide skill gap between those who have just started cooking compared to those who are more experienced. And upon completion, points and cash will be rewarded based on both how fast the meal came out and how closely it resembles the recipe. It's perhaps the most elaborate attempt at cooking simulation I've seen in a game, as it's this large margin for error that makes correct completion so rewarding. There's a far more satisfying feeling of growth here, as at the beginning of the game you can barely use the utensils correctly, but as you continue to cook you'll find yourself become more speedy and efficient. So Cooking Simulator is excellent at representing the theme of growth, but there are still issues that stop it from being what I'm looking for. And if you remember the cutscene that I've drawn inspiration from for this video, you might be able to figure out why. So to better explain, let's pop back into the world of culinary media. Upon further viewing, another major theme that resides within many great cooking-based film and television is the idea of community. After all, food is still the king at bringing people together. And being such a broad concept, I think its representation on screen can be split into two categories. The first being cooking for people, whether it's those we care about or for a judge in competition to be critiqued as seen in something like MasterChef, and the second being cooking with people, coming together and combining your skills to create a dish far greater in flavour than you could have achieved alone, as seen in something like Ratatouille. So it's this social aspect, or lack thereof, that's ultimately Cooking Simulator's downfall. After you complete a meal, you just send it up a chute never to be seen again, and in return you hope to see a satisfactory star rating and big numbers. Now the game specifies the orders are for customers, but it's no one you ever see, so upon repeating the process, a lack of interaction with anyone quickly makes the game feel lonely and purposeless. So while we've discussed growth and found games that represent this well, I'd like to find a cooking game that also represents this social aspect of food, and see it incorporated in a way that makes for satisfying game design. The most obvious attempt at this is the cooperative series Overcooked, in which you're tasked with, you guessed it, completing orders from customers as quickly as possible. But the game-changing catch here is that you have to work together with your fellow chefs or you will fail. Instead of choosing to focus on realistic simulation, the Overcooked games were designed with the social aspect at the forefront, meaning communication between chefs is mandatory or you and your friends will quickly find yourselves in shouting matches. While it isn't a shining example of growth, it does do a fantastic job at representing the idea of cooking with people. And there's a satisfying feeling that comes with successful teamwork when switching up your strategy or delegating roles with your team to finally overcome a difficult level. A different way this idea of community was approached was in the game Cook or Be Cooked for the Wii, and designed its gameplay not on cooking with people, but for them in the form of critique. Completing a tasty dish under the time limit to be scored by a judge is an obvious way to implement a social aspect into game design. It also contains that same basic motion control cooking as seen in Cooking Mama, but the difference here is that the game attempts to teach the player why we cook things, with handy and applicable health and cooking tips given via narration as you cook, further developing your kitchen knowledge, albeit just the basics. It's sort of a middle ground between Cooking Mama and Cooking Simulator in terms of difficulty and realism, but probably does the communal aspect better than either. As strange as this is, I think it's far more satisfying to see your meal actually being eaten at the completion of the level, with the judges giving verbal feedback. It's small, but it's a helpful reminder that the dish you're serving is for people to enjoy, which is endlessly more gratifying to see rather than having it just disappear into a void. So thus far we've discussed cooking games that have distinct ways of incorporating themes of growth and community into their gameplay, but there's a remaining theme that I've yet to touch on. Something that I think, if incorporated correctly, elevates a piece of food media from good to great. Perhaps the theme I value the most: the idea of creativity. The active encouragement of adaptation and imagination as seen in something like Iron Chef. Surely the ability for the player to express themselves through brand new concepts and combinations within their meal would make for satisfying gameplay. But an idea like this will prove to be somewhat of a design challenge for developers, as they need some way of encouraging the player to experiment with their food. A system that will reward those who opt to follow their own creativity rather than the cookbook verbatim. So to my disappointment, finding a cooking game that represented this idea successfully was near impossible. And I think it's because this idea in a cooking game can't really work, because to gain a feeling of satisfaction, the player requires direction and feedback. Plonking them into a kitchen and telling them to just cook whatever is a daunting task, because at no stage in the process will they ever be sure they're going the right way or doing the right thing. Zero communication between the game and player, if anything, will have them playing conservatively, the exact opposite of what we want here. Which begs the question, how can creativity be implemented into cooking-based game design? Well, perhaps it's time to visit our trusty and reliable culinary media one last time to gain a better understanding of how a game could do this. I think a clever way in which the concept of cooking is approached was in Midnight Diner: Tokyo Stories. It's a heartwarming little drama series that centers on the lives of many odd and interesting characters that frequent a cozy back alley late night diner. And I don't think I've ever seen a food show quite like it, as this series takes a creative approach, in that while cooking is heavily featured, the show doesn't particularly care about it. What I mean is, while episodes will often start by highlighting a particular dish, the discussion will be quickly dropped in order to pursue a more emotional and engaging storyline about the person eating it. So when the dramatic conflict does inevitably arise, it's never about the food at all. Rather, it's about what's happening around it. So what if we were to begin looking for something that follows this recipe? A game that includes cooking but isn't necessarily about cooking. An approach that potentially allows for much more creative and expansive storytelling about the people who both make and eat these dishes. Opening the door to find games that let us experience the act of cooking from clever and inventive perspectives, rather than keeping us cooped up in the kitchen. Well, following this path will eventually lead us to The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Despite being an open-world adventure game, its cooking mechanics are extremely creative, and remains one of my favourite aspects of the game. During his journey, Link can forage and hunt for flora and fauna to use in dishes that will regenerate his health and assist him with various buffs based on what ingredients have been used together. However, there are no recipes or cookbooks to copy from. For the most part, dishes are created entirely through trial and error. And only then, upon a successful dish being created, will the recipe be noted down. And it's this gamble that occurs every time you approach the pot that creates such a satisfying experience, as it encourages the player to mix foods that you wouldn't usually think about in order to reap greater reward. With the possibility of failure if too many poor choices are mixed together, it creates an amazing feeling of accomplishment after you finally discover a combination that's buffs now surpasses your usual go-to recipe. So now we've found games with clever cooking mechanics that successfully incorporate these themes of growth, community, and creativity within their design, integrating them in a way that creates satisfying gameplay. But we've yet to find a game that effectively incorporates all three. Well, what if I told you that game exists? And its name is Battle Chef Brigade. Battle Chef Brigade has a daring concept, and attempts to do what no other cooking game in this video has done. Rather than striving for perfect simulation, it just wants to tell us the story of a chef. Playing through its campaign, we experience the rise of the young and unproved Mina as she joins an elite culinary academy. Here you form relationships with your fellow classmates and are pitted against them in cooking competition to determine who can make the tastiest dish. In these contests of skill, you have to go out and forage and hunt for your ingredients, combining the earth, water, or fire elements that define them to create the highest scoring dish. It's perhaps the best example of the incorporation of all the themes I've mentioned. And what's most surprising, that I'm sure you've no doubt noticed, is that Battle Chef Brigade is technically not even a cooking game. I mean, there is cooking, of course, but gameplay largely takes the form of both a hack and slash and, of all things, a match 3 puzzle game. There's no peeling or chopping to perform, but rather it's your ability to quickly match the elements within your dish to cater for the judge's preferences that ultimately determines your success. And it's the feelings that accompany these events that have Battle Chef Brigade remaining the most satisfying cooking game I've ever played. There's a great sense of accomplishment that comes with serving up one of these massive dishes, especially against someone who's just been talking smack about you, because it isn't afraid to lean into the drama and theatre of the kitchen. And it all works due in part to a degree of separation here that I think really works in the game's favour. Rather than trying to provide a realistic hands-on experience to make us feel like the ultimate chef, it instead only allows us to peer through a window into the world of cooking, much like in the same way that those captivating culinary movies and TV shows do. It's not for everyone, but I find it's always more satisfying to have a character to cheer for, and to care about on their rise to the top, as you watch Mina emotionally grow, explore her culinary community, and create spectacular dishes to wow the judges. These aspects combining together to leave me considering Battle Chef Brigade as perhaps the best cooking game, period. Of course, it's not the perfect cooking game though. I don't think that exists yet, and I'm certainly not talented enough to make it. But at least now we have a better understanding as to what that game might look like. Cooking is an amazing human skill, an art form capable of creating connection in a way that very few trades can. It's a profession that hopefully soon receives some better representation in the world of video games, as its potential in the medium is still largely unexplored. The genre is ripe with opportunity to create something that we've never seen before, hopefully utilizing some of the themes that made cooking's previous movie and TV representations so successful. So I'd like to thank you for joining me in exploring some of the games that have already attempted this feat, as we discuss just exactly what ingredients make for a satisfying cooking game. Thanks for watching.